On SDC, Apple has successfully taken billions of dollars away from Facebook. I don't know how that squares with the, what is it called, the metaverse. We see yet another warning from Microsoft about password attacks as hackers in the US see if they can match China's success rate last week. And we're looking at WhatsApp settings that you need to change because despite what you might have heard, your WhatsApp isn't as secure as you think.
So where do we start this week then, people?
Well, you've got to start with Facebook. And clearly this is, I guess, in a couple of years, we'll all be, virtual memes of ourselves and, none of us will exist. We'll all be meeting in some weird world like Zuckerberg was this week on his various videos. Fun times.
Yeah, but what really matters with Facebook is this going to make any difference to anything?
Well, the metaverse is a bit of a strange concept, isn't it? I mean, people in technology are convinced it's going to take off, whether it's going to be led by Facebook or not. There's been some real cringy tweets this week from Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, the guy's a robot. He's he's not the most charismatic of people. But enough of that, really. The interesting thing that's happening at the moment is that we're hearing a lot about Apple's app tracking transparency recently. Now we're hearing about a figure associated with that. And the app tracking transparency, which, as we know, makes people have to give permission for apps to track them across other apps and services. This affects Facebook, one of the most out of all the apps, because of its advertisers and because of its very nature. The estimations are that this is actually going to take 10 billion off the advertising industry. So it's not just Facebook, it's across the industry, but it's a really big figure, isn't it?
They're obviously going to have to try and come up with other ways to recoup that loss. And those ways may not necessarily be better than what went before.
But I guess everybody hasn't been impacted in the way that the likes of Facebook and Snapchat and others have been impacted. And Google seems to have kind of ignored the problem, right? It has not more than survived, it's thrived. Its advertising revenues are up. And I think it just goes to show, as we've said multiple times in SDC, that when it comes to digital advertising, the real gorilla in the cage isn't Facebook, it's Google.
One area that Google's done well this week so far is it hasn't been hacked. I've been looking at the Pwn to Own, and that is the correct way of pronouncing it. I don't care what anybody else says. Pwn to Own. There's a hint there, which started yesterday as we're recording this. This is another big hacking competition, this time in the US. But it's a bit different to the Chinese one a few weeks ago, the Tianfu Cup, in that it's a bit boring so far. A Canon printer was taken over yesterday. First time a printer's fallen at Pwn to Own. Another printer fell later in the day. Biggest cash prize, $60,000, was for a code execution on a Sonos One speaker, which is fine. Other than that, just a bunch of routers and cloud storage devices. But the headline for me is the one that didn't get hacked, which was a Samsung Galaxy S21, which remained exploit-free after the hackers failed to launch their exploit successfully in the allotted time.
But clearly without the support, I'm sorry, we can't say that, without the theoretical support of the Chinese state hackers, it seems it's not quite as successful. But I'm sure we can all draw our own conclusions about the difference between the Chinese hacking competition and the US hacking competition.
Well, I think part of it as well is that the Tianfu Cup is very theatrical. And some cybersecurity professionals, in fact, one chief security officer I spoke to called it a show of force rather than a genuine competitive real-time hack, and the cyber equivalent of flying planes over Taiwan.
Ooh, the politics, brilliant.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
And that's not the only thing that's been going on. Obviously, we also got Microsoft has been warning about password spraying attacks, and this caught my attention this week. Mainly because there was a story that seemed to be popping up everywhere because it was highly syndicated, stating that Microsoft had been hacked and billions of passwords were at risk, when actually that's not quite true, because they were warning about a password spraying technique, that they've seen an uptick of attacks on admin accounts over the last year. They haven't actually, some of those will have been hacked, yeah, for sure, they will have been attacked. But most of them won't, and certainly not billions. The billions figure comes from a report that was quoted by Microsoft saying that there were 5 billion credential pairs for sale on criminal forums globally. And that's not Microsoft accounts, that's all accounts. So that's all that was, which doesn't mean that it's not a serious issue, it is. And password spraying is where, if you think of a brute force attack as being targeting a small number of accounts with a large number of password attempts, the spraying attack is the opposite. So it's a large number of accounts targeted by very highly focused number of passwords, generally common known passwords that are on the market.
And this tells people kind of I guess the really important lesson about passwords is strong and unique, and also just don't reuse them across services, because this is going to really put you at risk from these sorts of attacks.
And this particular is warning from the Microsoft Detection and Response Team, DART, is saying that it's admin accounts that are being targeted. And that's Exchange, SharePoint, security admins, help desk admins, wherever. So the advice is use multi-factor authentication, go passwordless if you can with Microsoft. Don't use your common or weak passwords. And don't make exceptions to a conditional access policy that you've got in your business for admins or C-level accounts, because they're the ones that are most likely to be targeted.
So the other thing that's happening this week is a bit more news from Apple on the features front. iOS 15.2 is on the way. The beta versions are out. We're going to be waiting a little while for it yet. But one of the biggest features, which was kind of one of the headline features on iOS 15 itself, is the app privacy report, which we've talked about before. So this is a report of the apps accessing permissions on your phone, which ones they're accessing, as well as the tracking that's happening across your phone as well. So there's going to be a report on this. You can actually get the report now, but the weird thing is you can't actually read it. So you can download this report onto your phone. What you have to actually do is then transfer it onto your laptop and put it into a text file. So you can read it, but it doesn't really make much sense unless you're an advanced user. What this update is going to do is put it into a really nice, easy to read interface on your phone. So you'll actually be able to see it. You'll be able to see very clearly who's tracking you and who's accessing permissions, and you can shut those down. So I'm quite excited about that anyway. There's a new WhatsApp feature coming out as well, isn't there, Zach? Or am I mistaken?
Yeah, so WhatsApp's making a lot of hay about it finally adding end-to-end encryption to its backups. There's a tiny little caveat that is buried in the footnotes, and that is if you have an iPhone and you don't switch off your iCloud backup, then the end-to-end encrypted WhatsApp backup is pointless, because you are still backing up a non-end-to-end encrypted iCloud backup of the same messages. I find this really interesting because it kind of, did you see this in the announcements? Kind of passed a lot of people by, right? A lot of hoo-ha about finally it's the best end-to-end messenger on the planet, and it's the only one that's got all these features, but there are some asterisks that need to be applied there. So we'll show you how to make sure that happens. Clearly some compromises if you're an iPhone user, but if you want to back up stuff, then clearly this is what you need to do, and it will also make your iMessage a lot more secure as well. And then on that kind of general privacy front, a week or so ago, I looked at the accelerometer on iPhones, and the fact that something we actually haven't talked about on SDC yet, but the fact that Facebook, for some reason, continually tracks the movements of your iPhone, from which it can infer are you lying, sleeping, running up and down on the spot, skipping to work in a joyous and happy mood. Why Facebook wants that data, we can all make our own guesses. What's really interesting is the same researchers that did that have now started to look at where else these potential privacy issues might be. iPhone's pretty good. So if you run whatever web browser on the iPhone, Apple basically controls all web browsers' access to various features. It runs what's called WebKit, so everyone runs off the same framework. So a website would need to ask permission to access that kind of data on your iPhone. Not so on Android, unsurprisingly. On Android, it's kind of that permission is pretty much there by default. Chrome basically will happily give accelerometer information to any website that asks it. Others do the same. Firefox is much better, but again, on SDC, we just see these little chinks in the armor, if you like, where, you know, you do need to change the odd setting and all the rest of it just to make sure your privacy remains intact. And we'll just keep letting people know how to go about doing exactly that.